So it looks like we are 4 or 5, yeah. So probably the others are stuck in the snowstorm, so they couldn't make it. So all right, let's start. Well, first of all, I've got a very big number of answers to the survey. So when should the office hours be? So I think they're going to be on Tuesdays, because that's the unanimity. Yeah, I've seen. So yeah, so we'll do it on Tuesday. If you forgot and you still would like to say something about it, then you can go on the survey and answer. Maybe I'll decide yeah, after the class what we do about it. All right, so question about what we did last time, comments, otherwise we start with chapter 2. No, all right. Okay, well, I don't know if we are very few people, then ask questions, otherwise we might finish early, but yeah, I don't think we'll finish early. Okay, so let's go ahead. Oh yeah, about the slides. So I've tried as much as I could. I tried to go and buy them twice, and it's just impossible. I don't know what's happening. Maybe that's because they're calling UQAM and asking if I'm there and nobody's there because nobody's at UQAM. I don't. But so it looks like we're going to stick with these slides for the rest of the class. So it's not so bad in the sense that most of the hard material that we have to learn is things that doesn't really change too much over time. So some statistics do change, and then when I can, I update them, as you have seen in the first class. But yeah, mostly we're going to stick with the yeah, the models are the models. So Ricardo has been going around for a while, so it's not going to change from one edition to the next. Plus, if you buy the book, and so you can check whenever stuff has changed between now and then. Okay, so so this is what we're going to see, this concept of comparative advantage. So Ricardo is really the first person to consider why countries would trade. Before him, people thought, oh, well, it's good to export as much as possible and get gold. And then with my gold, I can pay my army and they can invade my neighbors. And then I'm bigger, so I'm even stronger. So that was the old way people were thinking about the stuff in Europe. Yeah, this led to, for instance, the organization of many places around the world, like for instance in America, to get as much gold as possible. But then Ricardo was one of the earliest thinkers who thought, no, we don't have to invade our neighbors. All we have to do is trade with them. If we trade with them, both of us can become wealthier. So that was revolutionary back then. I don't know about you. I feel in society there's maybe not as much backlash against trade as they're used to. So I don't think I'll get too many people who are not going to agree with my ideas, but or the ideas I'm presenting here. But if you do, please state it. Yeah. So, but yeah. So the basic idea is there's comparative advantage to between countries. So some countries are better at something, some others are better at the other. And once you trade, you have a mutual benefit from it. We're going to start with a one-factor economy. So yeah, so that's just labor, so just people who work. And we trade in a one-factor world. So and the thing is, in some industry, the factor is going to be more productive than in the other. So that's what's going to generate trade. So some misconceptions about comparative advantage. but as I alluded to, I don't think you're going to be too much to have too many misconceptions, but we'll see. Then many goods. This is a bit more tricky, but yeah, we are going to get there at the end of the class. Transport costs, non-traded goods. So yeah, we'll see how far we get. All right. So countries engage in international trade for two basic reasons. So they are different from each other in terms of climate, land, capital, labor, technology. So this is the program for the next, say, 4 chapters of the book. That's really it. So yeah. Yeah, so here we're going to look at technology in particular. So if we were identical, then there would really be no point in trading at all. So if my neighbor is exactly the same in this framework, then it just doesn't make sense, because I'm as good as they are at producing whatever they are producing. So there's just the transport cost, but we don't benefit from it. So we have to be different. And the whole program is to see the sort of ways that we can be different. So say, yeah, so we're going to have 2 endowments that are going to be different in the Excheverlin model. Yes, so it's based on technological differences across countries. So these technological differences are reflected by the productivity of labor. Yeah, so I can just say so. So David Ricardo, he lived from 1772 to 1823, and so he started the so Adam Smith died in 1790, so Ricardo was just after him. So these are all the old ideas, but they are always relevant. All right. So what's going on? Well, if you think about it, so on Valentine's Day in the US, so the US demand for roses is about 10 million roses. And what should they do about it? Should they try producing their roses by themselves, or should they import roses? Well, the problem with producing roses by yourself, especially in February in the US, is that it can be expensive. So because the climate is not too warm, so especially if you really have one day of the year to have this spike in the demand for something like roses, then to just to match this demand, you would need to create heated greenhouses, and it would be a whole big organization just to produce this. So there's the cost of energy, capital, and labor, which are substantial. So what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is, okay, maybe we can trade. So maybe some neighbor of us is better at producing roses than we are. So then what we can do is trade, so buy roses from them and sell them something else in return. So for instance, computers. So and so who is it that would be good to sell roses to the US? Then of course it's Mexico. So then that's the sort of the starting point to discuss this point. And now the important notion, opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost of roses in terms of computer is the number of computers that could be produced with the same resources as a given number of roses. So in general, so opportunity cost is the value of what is being sacrificed. So yeah, I choose A. I can't get the opportunity cost of choosing A is the value of B. So in that case, if I have a worker or a bunch of workers and I set them to produce roses, then it means that these workers cannot be employed producing computers too. So the opportunity cost of them of producing roses is not being able to produce computers. So it's the value of the computers that they could have been producing if they were producing roses. All right. Does that make sense? Questions about this? No? Okay. And so what we're going to see is the comparative advantage is when the opportunity cost of producing something is in one country is lower than the opportunity cost in producing the same thing in the other country. So it doesn't, so you could argue, you could have a situation in which the US worker can choose to produce roses and be very productive at it, and computers and be very productive at it more than a Mexican producer worker, for instance. But that's not what we care about. What we care about is the opportunity cost of producing the roses or the opportunity cost of producing the computer. So just when I was preparing this, I was just unsure. Have you seen the Ricardo model once or no? Yes, no, it is. Yeah, so for everybody, it's you have seen this before? Or okay, so yeah. Yeah, so some people say, yeah, all right. Yeah, so that's the thing. I really didn't know what level you would be. So anyways, if it's too slow at the end of the class, you can say it and say, please go faster, I'll go faster. Because I think your level might be heterogeneous too. So I have to adapt myself. All right. So comparative advantage is, yeah, in producing one good is the opportunity cost of producing that good in terms of the other goods. And if it's lower in your country, then you have an opportunity cost in producing it. So suppose that in the US, you can produce 10 million roses. And with the same resources, you can produce 100 million computers. So what's the, and suppose that in Mexico, you can produce 10 million roses. And with the same resources, you could produce 30,000 computers. So the opportunity cost in the US of producing those roses is 100,000, and in the Mexico it's 30,000. So it means that the opportunity cost of putting your computer workers and producing roses in US is much higher than in Mexico. So it looks like there might be some gain from trade from that. And here, note that so on average, so both Mexican and US workers are as productive to produce roses, but Mexican workers are strictly less productive at producing computers. Yeah, and so what is the assumption there? So this opportunity cost is always is constant, no matter the amount of production. So it's assuming a very simple technology. It's just looking at, so it's assuming that however many roses you're producing or computers you're producing, the sacrifice you have to do in terms of producing roses or computers is always the same, right? And if you had something like, if I had something that looked like this as production possibility frontier, and I had, say, roses here, or yeah, and oh yeah, that's not too and computers there. So if my production possibility frontier looked like this, then that wouldn't be the case, because here the sacrifice of increasing the production of roses from 0 to say 1 million would be quite low in terms of computer, but here the sacrifice would be quite steep. So in that case, so what you would say is, so that's production possibility frontier. And here you would have a varying opportunity cost. Yeah, so that's that here. All right, so in that situation, you get that. Here, the opportunity, I can show it to you like this. Green. So here you have a shallow slope or a gentle slope. So it means that you have a small opportunity cost of starting to produce roses, but here the opportunity cost is very high. So that would be normally what we would think about. But in this model, it's a very simplified version of reality in which the opportunity cost is the same. So rather than looking like this, as we're going to look to see, it's going to just look like a straight line. All right. So that the goal of trade is to specialize in what you're good at. So each country will specialize in the production of the good with the lower opportunity costs. And then trade will then be beneficial to both countries. So roses have lower opportunity costs in Mexico. So Mexicans are going to produce roses, and computers have lower opportunity costs in the US. So Americans will produce computers. And the benefits from trade can be seen by considering the changes in production of roses and computer in both countries. So for instance, what if I start with a situation where we don't trade at all, and then we decide, okay, in the US, we produce 10 fewer million roses. So how many computers can we get? We get 100 more computers, because as you remember, this was the case. So for 1 million, you get 10 million, or 10 million, you get 100 million. So if we subtract by 10, we get 100 more. And in South America, or in Mexico, then to offset the change in the US, then you increase by 10 million roses. So that way you don't change the total number of roses produced. But then we have to sacrifice this 30 million computers that won't be able to be produced in Mexico. But then you see that in total, we have 70 more. So 100 minus 30, so 70 more computers in total. So then this doesn't say anything about by production. We can generate a larger output. But how much each country benefit will depend on the international price. So if we were to set a price that would be exactly 1/10, so 0.1, so that means that the price would be exactly equal as the price was in the US. Then the US would gain absolutely nothing by changing this, but Mexico would gain a lot. And by the same token, if we set a price that was closer to the relative cost in Mexico, then the US would gain a lot by trading, but Mexico wouldn't gain at all. So what we have to do is set a price in the middle. So something like, so here is 1 and 10. So it could be, and here's 1 and 3. So it could be something like 1 and 5. So you trade, say 1 million rows for 5 million computers at the international price, and then each country would benefit from the trade. So how does the prices get determined at the international stage? Then this is what we're going to see. But so far, does that make sense? Yeah, no question. Okay. Yeah, so this is just a reminder of what we just said. So each country exports the good in which they have a comparative advantage. All country can gain from the trade. So what determines the comparative advantage? Well, as we already said, it's production cost. And then what will determine ultimately the pattern of trade is going to be the demand for each good. So this is the place where it becomes more tricky. So we are going to take more time. Okay, so this is the same model, but this is a different set of numbers, but the same idea also. We are going to have a model, a country called home and a country called foreign. So again, we're going to have situation with 2 countries and 2 goods. That's enough. So labor is the only factor of production. And there are two goods that you can produce with your labor. So here is going to be wine and cheese. So the supply of labor is fixed in each country. So that's just going to be capital L. Yeah, I can put it here. So it's going to be capital L. Yeah, and the productivity of labor in each good is fixed. So that's what I was saying here. So here the relative productivity is not fixed, but here it will be fixed. So it means that no matter the level of production cost is the same, or marginal cost. And perfect competition prevails in all market. So this is important. Otherwise, you could have to determine the price. Otherwise, so you could have, I would say, imperfect competition, or at the international stage. And that happens. So for instance, in Quebec, we have, we produce maple syrup, and we have a strategic reserve of maple syrup just outside Quebec City. I think it's in Lévis. It's a huge building with a huge reservoir of maple syrup in which we just put all the maple syrup produced in Quebec. And then with this, we're able, since we have almost a monopoly on maple syrup production, then we are able to restrict the supply of maple syrup around the world so that the world price of maple syrup increases. Yeah, so that's a way in which we make sure that competition is to our advantage. So it's not fair for other countries that import maple syrup. And if you go there, then maple syrup can be super expensive, because the only other competitor is, I would say, is the northern United States, maybe. But in our case, we're going to see that a perfect competition will prevail in all markets. Okay, so now we're getting to the nitty-gritty of the model. So the unit labor requirement will be the number of hours of labor required to produce one unit. So it means, so country, yeah, so workers, yeah, okay, so A is unit labor. So if A is low, then country or sector is productive. All right. So for instance, if I need 10 workers to produce one unit, then I'm more productive than if I need 20 workers to produce that unit. And A is the number of workers required to produce a certain amount of unit, all right, in the model. Yeah, so ALW is going to be the unit requirement in labor to produce wine. So ALW, so L for labor and W for wine. So if ALW is 2, then it means that you need here, okay, it's going to be the number of hours that of labor that you need. So you could put like 2 people for 1 hour or 1 person for 2 hours, it doesn't matter. So we need 2 hours of labor to produce 1 gallon of wine. And ALC is the unit labor requirement for cheese. So ALC equals 1. So it means that we need 1 hour of labor to produce 1 pound of cheese. Just as intuitively, what do you think should be more expensive between wine and cheese?
Wine?
Yes, that makes sense to everybody. So if I can, if I have, so imagine I'm just one firm that has those 2 outputs, wine or cheese. So I'm a supplier for hotels. So if it costs me twice as much work for my employee to produce wine than cheese, then of course I'm going to sell my wine more expensive than my cheese. But then what we're going to see is if there is trade, then it might not be the same for the other country. Yeah, so the economy's total resources are defined as L, the total labor supply. So L equals 120. So so it means that this economy is endowed with 120 hours of labor or 120 workers. So then I can use this L, this 120, to produce either wine or either cheese, right? And so production possibility frontier is how much I will be able to produce in total, either wine or cheese in my economy. So this looks pretty much like budget constraints. So this is of course, I'm assuming that everybody produces as much as they can. So I don't have something like smaller or equal here. So I'm just going to say that it's equal. So I'm able to at least use my my resources at their maximum. So this is a description of the production possibility frontier. So ALC QC plus ALW QW equals L. And then what I can just do is, from the previous example, just substitute ALC, which was 1, plus ALW, which was 2, equals L equals 120. So we can just so what's the largest amount of cheese I can produce? Just to see if you're following.
Is it 118?
Say that again.
118.
Amount of cheese?
Yes.
Okay, so if I want to produce as much cheese as possible, that's QC. So what I'm going to do is use all my labors to produce this. So then I'm going to produce zero wine. And I see that QC is going to be equal to 120.
Sorry, I thought we had to also produce wine in that example.
Yeah, but I'm saying what would be the maximum you could produce in terms of cheese? Okay. Oh yeah, and now I'm just going to look at the, yeah, so they put it, yeah, they put cheese there. So just put this there, this there. So then this would be cheese. And here the best I can do is produce 120. And how much wine could I produce at the maximum? You can write it in the comment, or you can send me an anonymous message if you don't want to take a risk.
I just want to understand if the maximum cheese we can do is 120,
Yeah.
then to make wine is half, because
Yes,
2
exactly.
hours, like we need 2 units. No, how was it? In 2 hours, we needed 2 units to make it or whatever. I don't remember.
Yes, exactly. So the unit requirement for cheese is 1.
Yeah.
There's a 1 here.
So since it's 2 for wine, is half the quantity you can make.
Yeah. So imagine I decide to produce. So let's imagine that I decide to produce 10 and 10, right? So 10 cheese and 10 wines. 10 bottles. So how much will I need as workers in total? I'm going to need 10 times how many workers I need. So 10 times 1 plus 10 times 2. So I'm going to need 30 people in total, right?
Oh yeah, in total, yeah.
So then it means that, so now what I want to show is the production possibility frontier. So yeah, so I've determined, so what's the largest amount of cheese I could produce? Well, is if I spend nobody at all producing wine, so this is 0. So I can then put everybody at producing cheese. So then the total production would be QC divided by, so 120 divided by 1, so 120. And I got the right answer as a suggestion. So yeah, so it's 60.
Yeah.
So for wine. And the production possibility frontier will look like this. Yeah, okay. And so what I could also is produce a certain mix of the two. So for instance, if I decide to produce, I don't know, 100 cheese, then I would need 100. So 100 times 1, so 100 people. So the amount I would have left is 120 minus 100, so 20. So then I would have to use my 20 last workers to produce wine, so that I would get 20 divided by 2, so 10 wine. So yeah, so 110 would be another combination. For instance, it would be something like here, for instance. So yeah, so this is going to be determine what I can produce. So here it is. So this is just the same thing, but without the numbers. So that's the maximum amount of gallon of wine I can produce, L divided by ALW, and maximum amount of cheese I can produce is L divided by ALC. And this is, of course, the opportunity cost. So between the two, so each time I want to increase my production of, say I'm here, I want to increase my production of cheese by some amount, then I have to decrease my production of wine by some amount. Yeah, so the absolute value of the slope is the opportunity cost of cheese in terms of wine. That's what we care about. And now what's going to be awesome is the ability to increase. So what will be ultimately my choice? Well, what I can, so my choice is going to be determined by whatever people like in this country. So if this is, so you can have some sort of, oops, yeah, that's not too good. Indifference curve at the national level, that would look like this. Or let's put that in green. So here I'm going to see it's a representative consumer. Because of course I have many consumers, but yeah, you could imagine that I represent the taste of one person that's indicative of the taste of the whole country. And then that country would decide to produce here. And then what we're going to see is, thanks to trade, that country is going to be able to arrive at a higher indifference curve. All right. Okay, so this is just what we've just seen so far. So the particular amount of each good produced is determined by prices. And the prices are going to be, yeah, determined. So preference, determine price, or determine quantity. Yeah, but then the relative price, you see that it's always the same. So again, I go back to what I showed you before here. So if my production possibility frontier looked like this, then the relative price would change with respect to how much of one or the other I produce. But here it doesn't change. So if I produce 0 of one and 60 or 120 and 0, the relative price is always the same because the slope is always the same. Yeah. So the relative price of good X in cheese in terms of wine, Y is the amount of good Y that can be exchanged for 1 unit of good X. So first example, if the relative price of a can of Coke is 0.5, so the relative price of Coke is the dollar amount that can be exchanged for 1 unit of Coke, so it's 0.5. And the relative price of a dollar in terms of Coke is 2, because I can exchange 2 cans of Coke per dollar. So this is the relative price of Coke and money, but then what we care about is relative price of wine and cheese. So I can say here. So, price of cheese in terms of, let's say, wine in terms of cheese. So somebody can compute that. So relative price of wine is how much wine costs me to get. And then here it's not going to be in terms of money, it's going to be in terms of cheese, because that's what we care about. So it's how much cheese do I need to sacrifice to get 1 more unit of wine.
2 cheese per wine?
Yeah, exactly. It's 2 divided by 1. Why? Because if I'm, say, here, and I want to get 1 more unit of wine, then I have to sacrifice 2 units of cheese. That's all there is to it. And the trick is that in the other country, it's going to be different. So that's how we're going to be able to have this gain from trade. Okay, so this is just Coke in terms of money and money in terms of Coke. Okay, so here I think I'm going to yeah, so here they introduce a bunch of things, and I think I'd like to discuss a bit more in detail why they do that. So how do you determine how much people are going to produce or not? So here's how they do it. So you denote by PC the dollar amount of cheese, and with PW the dollar amount of wine. Denote WW the dollar wage in the wine industry, and WC the dollar wage in the cheese industry. Then under perfect competition, a non-negative profit condition implies that PW, if PW divided by AW is smaller than WW, then there's no production. So this is equal to 0. No production of wine. So this is equal to 0. And if it is equal, then there is production of wine. So this can be greater than 0. Okay, so now this looks abstract, so I'm going to say a bit more concretely what this means. So let me open some other window real quick. Okay, so are you familiar a bit with profit maximization and firms and all of these things? A bit, yes, not too much. Okay, so yeah. So I'll do it for any sector, and you can see how this goes. So profit is denoted W, and it's equal to revenue minus cost. Okay. And here, what is the revenue? So revenue is the price times the quantity produced. So the sales price is how much I can sell something times the quantity produced. And here, what is the cost? I have only one. So yeah, yeah, okay, I'll just write it down, and then so if I produce Q, then I need AL amount of labor to produce it. And so this is the amount of workers I need to employ. And there's some wage rate that I have to pay them, all right? So this, I'll post this later on the class website. So price profit. Q is production. W is wage. AL labor per unit produced. All right. So that's the profit generated by a firm who, so here what we assume is that labor is the only thing I need to produce something. So I don't have a minus RK, for instance. This, if I needed some machines, then that would be part of the cost, but here that's not the case. There's only labor. And normally what you would do if you did, so if you've seen this before, what you can do is maximize profits. So you take the first derivative of profit with respect to Q and find the optimal quantity to produce. But in this case, you cannot really do this. Why? Because the profit is a linear function of quantity Q. Because what happens is if PQ minus WALQ is positive for some amount of Q, then if you say double the quantity Q, then you just double the profit. If you divide by 2, you just divide the profit by 2. So you essentially have only, so the only thing that can happen is either you want to produce infinite amount or no amount whatsoever. All right, so what we impose is the following. So imperfect. So profits are 0. So are you familiar with this a bit? So what this says is, as soon as there's positive profits, then other firms are going to enter the market. And when there are negative profits, firms are going to leave the market. So in the long run, profits should not be too far from 0. So you, as I said, if they are positive and I can choose whatever quantity I want to produce, then I would produce an infinite amount, because I could always increase and increase and increase my profit by hiring new people. And if they were negative, then I would just decide to produce 0, because that's the least amount of money I would waste. So the only value for profits that makes sense is to have 0 profits. So in this case, I would have 0. So what I would find is PQ. So my revenue has to be equal to my production cost. So then I have simply that P equals to Q, because I can cancel the Q on either side. Yeah, so and I can get this. All right. So if W equals P over AL, so if the wage that I have to pay my worker equals to the revenue I get from this worker, which is the sales price divided by its productivity, then the firm produces some positive amount. And if W is larger than PWL, then P over AL, then what happens?
We lose profit? No.
Yes. So if I lose money, what's the best I can do for me?
Stop the projection.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, really?
Then the firm produces 0. Yeah, so this is what's going to happen at the country level. So the only way to have a positive production in some sector is if the wage rate is equal or lower than P over P divided by AL. And if the wage rate is higher than P divided by AL, then no firm will want to employ workers in this sector. So this sector is not going to be a productive one. But what we're going to do is import whatever production we need from some other country. All right. So let me go back to. Yes, Nelia Bagou.
So just to be sure, I wanted to ask, so the ideal scenario will be W being equals to P divided by AL, or for W to be inferior?
So it's not a question of ideal scenario, but it's
like to get more profit.
Yeah, for a firm to get more profit. Yeah, if the wage rate is, so if the wage rate I have to pay a worker is smaller than what this worker gets me as in terms of revenue, then I will perfectly hire that worker. But then, so I would hire a second worker and a third worker and a fourth worker, because all of them are always giving me more money than I have to pay them. So it means I would hire an infinite number of workers if I could. So since this cannot happen, the thing is, it's a very simple model. There's Q enters in the production linearly. So you would get some crazy numbers like this. So this is just to say that to determine what a country will produce and what a country will not produce.
Okay.
And yeah, so when W equals to P divided by AL, then yes, it's going to produce, and otherwise it's not going. All right, so I'm just going to go back to what I was here. Right, so here I see that the yeah, just to so this is there was some L here which they forgot, I guess. Yeah, just because they yeah, they had L there, so I just want to correct their slides. Okay, so this is where this comes from. So now it's clearer. So when the income from a wine worker is smaller than its wage, then there's no production in wine. So QW is 0. When the income from workers in the wine sector is equal to their wage, then there is some production of wine. So QW can be larger than 0. And same thing for cheese. So when the P over ALC is smaller than WC, then there is no production of cheese. And if P over ALC is equal to WC, then there is some production of cheese. Yeah. Oh yeah, so this is yeah, there's something else that they don't say here. So let me go back to my my computation. So if so in the cheese industry, if production, if there is production in both industries, then I would have, yeah, okay, before that, what I want to say is assumption. There is free movement of workers between sectors. So the wage paid by the cheese industry equals the wage paid by the wine industry. All right, that makes sense. So this is, of course, this is within country. Or inside each country. There is no free movement workers between countries. Otherwise, of course, then all the Mexicans workers would just say, oh, I can earn much more money if I go to the US, so let me just go and work to the US. That's essentially what's been happening quite a lot. So why? Because they expect they're going to have higher wages there. Yeah, so if that's the case, so if there is production in both industries and wages are the same, then what do we get? We get that the wage in the cheese industry is equal to the wage in the wine industry. And what is the wage in the cheese industry? It's the price in the cheese industry divided by the worker production in the cheese industry, and this is the price in the wine industry divided by the worker production, or the requirement in the wine industry. And what do we get? So we can just shuffle this around, and what we see is AWL divided by ALW divided by ALC equals to PW divided by PC. So the relative price of wine and cheese reflects the relative productivity. And in the examples, what we then get. So we had that. This was 2, and this was 1. So it's 2. So this is exactly what we have discussed before. So we already had the right answer, that the price of wine should be twice as expensive as the price of cheese, since it requires twice as many workers to produce it. Makes sense? Okay, so I'm going back there. Okay. Oh yeah, so now they have the ratio inverted, but that's the same idea. So the relative price of cheese in terms of wine. So if the relative price of cheese in terms of wine exceeds the opportunity cost ALC divided by ALW, then the economy will specialize in the production of cheese. Oops. So we'll produce no wine and produce. So if you don't produce any wine, then you produce L divided by ALC cheese. All right. So if the price is, so if the country is autarkic, so if it doesn't trade, then this has to be the case. So it has to be the case that the relative price equals to the opportunity cost, and in that case we are yeah. So in this situation, for instance, that no matter what production is decided, the relative price will be equal to the relative production of the two. But if for whatever reason, then I'm able to trade at an international price, which is different from the domestic price, then what would producers decide to do? Well, they absolutely would then be able to set the price differently, and then they would just decide to produce 0 of one and all of the other. So for instance, they would produce all cheese or all wine. So the only way to produce a mix of the other is if the relative price is ALW divided by ALC. All right. Yeah, so PC, so that's exactly what we said. So here that would be equal to 1 divided by 2. And now we get to the interesting part. So if there are 2 countries in the world, then they can trade. So each 2 country, if each of the 2 countries produce the 2 goods. Oh yeah, so no, sorry. Of course, we have 2 goods and they could be potentially produced by each country. Labor is the only factor of production. Supply of labor is fixed in each country. The production of labor is in each good is fixed. The productivity of labor is fixed. In yeah, this is what we've been saying so far. Labor is not mobile across the 2 countries, so no migration. Perfect competition prevails in all markets, and all variables with an asterisk refers to the foreign country. So, and no asterisks. Home country. Okay, so what's the absolute advantage? Our country has absolute advantage if it has lower, yeah, this we said already. So assume that ALC is smaller than ALC and ALW is smaller than A star LW. Yeah, so assume you're not reading this. So I just want to see if you're following. So who has oops, yeah, I can remove this. So who has a absolute advantage in the production of cheese here? Home or foreign? Home is no asterisk and foreign is asterisk. Yes, and who has absolute advantage in wine? Yes, so I've got the right answer. So home has absolute advantage in cheese because it necessitates less workers to produce one unit compared to foreign, and it's the same thing for wine. But what we've been discussing so far is what matters is not the absolute advantage, it's the relative advantage or comparative advantage. So assume that ALC divided by ALW is smaller than ALC star divided by ALW star. Please don't read this. So who has, oh yeah, it's written there. Yeah. Anyways. So it means that home has a comparative advantage in cheese because the number of workers required per unit of cheese divided by workers required per unit of wine is smaller at home than abroad. So in cheese. All right, so this is what the situation in the foreign country. So they didn't say exactly what it was, but yeah, I think the numbers they're going to give is 2 and 1. So if you remember, in the home country, it looked like more like this, and this is what it looks in the foreign country. So the relative cost is different. Yeah, so that's what's going to be able to produce the relative production. So what determines the relative price after trade? So it's going to be determined by the relative supply and the relative demand. So should we take a break maybe? And then, yeah, so we can take like 15 minutes. And then I can show you what happens with the world production. All right. Okay, we are back. So up to now, it's been, I hope, not too difficult. But don't worry, now it's going to become a bit more, more challenging. So here we are. All right, so how can we think about this situation there? So it usually when we look at when we consider market equilibrium, then we look at the demand and the supply. In this case, it's challenging because we have demand and supply for two different goods, for wine and for cheese, and in the home country and in the foreign country. But there's a neat way to represent everything together in just one graph by looking not at absolute demand, absolute quantity demanded, and absolute price, but at, by looking at relative price and relative quantity. So here's how I'm going to introduce this. All right. So let's just, so I'm just going to create some blank stuff so we can think about it. So supply and demand. And so let's look at the cheese industry. At home. So how does that look like? So I would have here the price of cheese and the supply of cheese. So that would be QC. And here what happens is if I want to produce something, then the only thing that, so what would be the, so first of all, what would be the demand? So the demand would be something like this. So that would be the demand for cheese. And then what would be the supply for cheese, or the price at which cheese would be supplied? It would look like this. Why? Because it's the marginal cost and it's equal to 1. So as we remember, it only costs 1. So imagine so it depends on the wage rate, but assuming the wage rate is constant, so the marginal cost of supplying cheese is always the same, no matter what the quantity is. So this is how we would settle we would get the quantity of cheese produced and the market equilibrium of cheese. Does that make sense? Supply demand, you remember this? Yes. If not, there's so you can ask me. But now what we want to look is the total situation, so a sort of general equilibrium model So what we want to look at is the situation in both markets at the same time. So we're going to look now at the supply and demand of the cheese industry relative to the wine industry. At home. How does that look like? It looks like this. And then the difference is what? Here, what I'm going to show is not the price of cheese in dollar, but the price of cheese relative to the price of wine. So I get PC divided by PW. So how much cheese costs in relative to wine? And of course, the more it costs, then the less people want to consume, and the more it, the fewer it, the lower it costs, the more people want to consume. So it's the same. And the quantity would be the quantity of cheese relative to the quantity of wine. So everything is in relative term, but otherwise this is exactly the same. And what would be the, so this would be the supply of, the demand for cheese relative to wine. And what would be the relative price? It would be equal to ALC divided by ALW. Or let me put that in a better way. And then I'm going to put some small bar there. All right. So as we've seen so far, if there is going to be production of cheese and wine, so it must be the case that the relative price is ALC divided by ALW. So that's 1 divided by 2, so 1/2. It has to be the case. And what's going to determine the relative amount produced of cheese and wine at home? It's going to just be the demand for cheese and wine, cheese relative to wine. And that's determined by the preferences, as we've seen before, by the representative agents' preferences for both of them. So that's what happens when you don't trade. Okay. Is that clear? Are there questions here? Because now we're going to introduce trade, so things are going to get more complicated. Are people confused or not confused or not sure? So not sure what maybe why we introduce this. We introduce this to allow us to think better at what's happening later. So well, if you have questions, just yeah, and of course this is cheese versus wine. And the marginal cost is constant too. All right. Okay, so now what we're going to look at is not home by itself, like we just did, but home and foreign. so to determine how much cheese and wine is going to be produced in total, it's going to be I'm going to have to aggregate the market of home and the aggregate of foreign together. So the supply or the quantity is going to be the total quantity produced, which is QC plus Q star C, divided by the total quantity of wine produced, QW plus Q star W. And I'm going to look at the relative price again, PC divided by PW. And this, all these things are going to allow me to have demand and supply, and then I'm going to be able to see what's happening. So here it is. Here is what's happening. Okay. So yeah, maybe ignore the red part here. So consider just this blue one. So what happens now is if production is happening at home, then I'm on this relative cost price curve there. And if production is happening abroad, then this is the relative price abroad. This is still the relative demand. So how much people in total in both countries demand for cheese and for wine. Yeah, so how much they will demand, how much they will be ready to pay for cheese relative to wine as a relation of how much quantity of cheese and wine is on the market. And then what happens here is what happens when both countries are able to decide to produce each their own specialty. So if home is a very large country, then we're going to be here because the relative price is going to be determined by what's happening at home. And if foreign is large, then the relative prices are going to be set by foreign. And if both countries are relatively similar sized, then probably home is going to just produce cheese, foreign is going to just produce wine, and the relative price is going to be determined by this relative demand. It's going to be to cross this relative supply curve here. And what is this quantity here? That's the quantity when home produces only cheese and foreign produces only wine. So the relative quantity is, so how much in total, how much cheese is going to be produced? It's going to be L, the labor at home, divided by the productivity of labor at home, divided by how much foreign as of workers, L star, divided by how much workers it needs to produce wine, so A star LW. Okay, so is your brain all right, or no, not too much? Yeah, I was expecting this. So that's the thing with trade, is it can, yeah, especially the Ricardian model. It looks very simple when you look at it, but then when you really have to derive everything, then there's a bunch of things going on. Yeah, so one way I could maybe go further and oops. Here they show what happens, the gain from trade. So this is home. So we're back to the same graph that we've seen before with the production possibility frontier. So PF is for productivity frontier, I think. So it doesn't mean anything special. And if I'm at home, then I would be producing this, and I would be maybe here. But then if the international price is in between home and foreign, then the relative price would be higher. And what would home want to do? Home would want to produce only cheese, and then be able to exchange some cheese for some wine on the foreign market. and probably get somewhere like here. Yeah, so this is not my best drawing, actually. Yeah. And gain from trade. Now, if I was in foreign, so that's what foreign would be doing. So foreign would see that its relative price of wine is much more expensive than cheese than the international market. So again, foreign would produce only so foreign would produce here and then would exchange this on the world market. And this quantity here, so that would be how much, yeah, from this to here. So this quantity would be cheese exported from home to foreign. And this right here would be cheese imported from in foreign from home. And the same thing would happen with wine production. So we would have this gain from trade. And here, if both specialize exactly, like if home produces only cheese and wine produces only foreign, then we are in which situation? We are in this situation there. So is there a question by somebody that would clarify things? Or do you want me to explain it again? Not sure. So again, I'm just going to repeat, but and then at the end of the class, I'm going to give an exercise of the kind of thing you may have to answer. All right, and we can go over all of it again. So here, what we want is to show the world relative supply and demand for cheese relative to wine. If cheese is expensive relative to wine, so we are here, we are high there, and the world demand would be quite low, so there would be a small quantity of cheese demanded. If the price of cheese relative to wine is low, so we would be kind of here because the relative demand would be is always negatively sloped. So there will be a large quantity of cheese and a low price. So that's people want to pay little and want to accept to buy. And now, what is the quantity that's going to be produced at the world stage? So it depends on the relative price of the countries. And if foreign and home have somewhat same size workforce, then we're going to be here where so here everything is at so who produces, yeah, I'm going to so at this quantity exactly, so home produces only cheese, and foreign produces only wine. Okay. Now in this region, So from here to here, for instance, so here, home produces both cheese and wine, and foreign produces only wine. And so foreign produces all the workers in foreign produce wine, and they export to home. So here. And in this region there, so home produces only wine, and foreign produces wine and cheese. In this region. Okay. So here it would be the case if home is a big country. Here it would be the case if foreign is a big country. And if they are similar sized, then they will just specialize in each in the production of that they produce best. So does that make sense somehow? Somehow? So I think rather than, so I'll continue a bit, but rather than introduce many goods and stuff, I'll do an example with you. So I can show you the kind of thing I will ask you to do in exercises and the exam. So you're going to be less freaked out and hopefully more confident of what you understand. So I'll just continue and so I'll show you the small example I wanted to produce. So gains from trade. If countries specialize according to their competitive advantage, they all gain from this specialization and trade. So trade can be taught as new ways of producing goods and services. So rather than having my own workers produce each, then I can just have all my workers produce wine and then sell some of this wine, get some cheese, and then sell some of these cheese, import some of the wine, and then gain from that. That's what we've seen before. So okay, all right. So here the consumption possibility frontier, if there's no trade, it's equal to the production possibility frontier. But if there is trade, then it's enlarged. So as we've seen, so this would be the production possibility frontier and the consumption possibility frontier if there is no trade. And here in home, if there is international trade with this relative price, then it means that the consumption productivity frontier is larger than before. So yeah, this would be the so the yellow bar. is the consumption possibility frontier after trade. Right. And the same thing can happen there. So what we see is the consumption possibility frontier is expanded thanks to trade. Makes sense? Numerical example. So we had this situation at home, 1 hour per pound for producing cheese, 2 hours per gallon producing wine. So imagine that in the foreign country, it takes 6 hours per pound to produce cheese. So they're much, much less productive, and 3 hours per gallon of wine to produce wine. So you see that they're less productive in cheese and in wine. But what matters is that here, the opportunity cost of one pound of cheese is 2 gallons of wine, and here the opportunity cost of 1 pound of cheese is 1/2. So what matters is opportunity cost. So it's of cheese, yeah. So home, it's 2 gallons of 2 divided by 1 equals 2 gallons of wine. And in foreign, it's 3 divided by 6 equals 1/2. So we see that so the opportunity costs differ. So that's why we generate a benefit from trade, right? Yeah, so this is what I just said there also, but that's revert. So ALC divided by ALW is 1/2, and it's smaller than ALC divided by ALW, which is 2. So the world equilibrium, the relative price of cheese, must be between these two values, because otherwise there's never going to be trade if it's smaller than 1/2 or above 2. And then assume that the world price is equal to 1, so 1 gallon of wine per pound of cheese. Then both countries would specialize, but so we don't know what will be the extent of the specialization. It depends on the size of each economy. So consider home can transform wine to cheese by either producing it internally or by producing cheese, then trading trading the cheese for wine. That's what I said. So home can use 1 hour of labor to produce 1/2 gallon of wine if it does not trade, but home can produce 1 pound of cheese and then sell it to obtain 1 gallon of wine. So if no trade, 1 labor produces 1/2 gallon wine. If trade, at price 1, then 1. Yeah, so I'm just going to put worker here. Produces 1 gallon of wine. So that's the goal of trading. All right, so this is all the same thing. So I think I would like to present you the exercise I've prepared. Yeah. Or maybe not, maybe continue a bit with that and then I can show you the exercise. Okay, so same thing for foreign. So in the absence of trade, foreign can produce 1 unit of labor, can use 1 unit of labor to produce 1/6 pound of cheese using the domestic technology. But if it does produce wine and then sell the wine for cheese instead, then it's going to be able to produce 1/3 gallon of wine. So that's much better. Yeah, so since the world price of wine is PW divided by PC equals 1, so 1 cheese per gallon. So foreign can obtain 1/3 of pound of cheese, which is more than 1/6. So again, for foreign, without trade, 1 worker, 1/6 pound of cheese. With trade, 1 worker, 1/3 pound of cheese. So foreign gains by trading. Relative wages. So does that mean that the relative wage is, so what will be the relative wage? Well, it's not going to equalize between the 2 countries. So do you have an idea where the relative, where the wage is going to be higher after trade? If it's going to be higher in home or in foreign? So I'm going to answer it right away after that, but just yes, that's a good intuition. So why is that? Well, there is trade under international trade, under international market. But still, so what happens is home produces wine. Home produces cheese, and they are extremely good at producing cheese. So they have good wage. Foreign is going to produce wine, and even though they're better off producing wine than producing cheese, still their productivity at producing wine is lower than what would be what would happen at home. So this is why, even though you gain, both countries gain from trade, it's not like the wages will equalize around the world. So here they give a small example of that. So I assume that the price of cheese is $12 and the price of wine is $12. So that's what we see around the world. So PC divided by PW would be 12 divided by 12. So it's equal to 1 in the example. At home, the home specializes in cheese after trade. So the wage rate is PC. So we've seen that wage rate is W equals P divided by AL, as we've seen earlier. You remember that? Yeah, so it will be PC divided by ALC. So 1 divided by, it's fair. Yeah, okay, so it's 1 divided, I don't know why they write it this way, but yeah, so it's 1 divided by 1 times 12, so it's $12. So that's wage at home. Then foreign specializes in wine, but the price of wine is again $12, and foreign needs 3 workers to produce 1 gallon of wine. So the wage rate at foreign will be $12 divided by, here it would be by 3. So you would get wage abroad. The wage at home is still better than the wage abroad. Why? Because people are much more productive at home. So this is, of course, because there's no migration between the 2 countries. So if there was migration and if it was possible for a foreign worker to come and work in the home country, so for example, a Mexican worker to go to the US and be exactly as productive as a US worker, then they would get the same wage as the US. But that wouldn't be a class about trade. It would be a class about migration, which is another interesting topic. Yeah, so the relative wage of home and foreign would be $12 divided by $4, so 3. So wage at home would be 3 times higher than the wage in the foreign country. And this is because of absolute advantage, of course, because just the technology at home is better than foreign. So misconceptions about trade. So tell me if you had these misconceptions, but so this is an older class. So maybe nowadays, I don't know if people still have these conceptions about trade. But here we go. So productivity and competitiveness. So free trade is beneficial only if a country is strong enough to withstand the foreign competition. No. Why? Because what you can still do is, even if foreign is not competitive or is less competitive than home in both so even so foreign is less competitive than home in both sectors, it gains by concentrating on producing wine, because it's even worse at producing cheese, so it's better to abandon the production of cheese. So this is what we computed here. So if it doesn't trade, then it would get one worker at foreign would just generate 1/6 pound of cheese. But if it can trade, then it would get 1/3 pound of cheese per worker. So it's beneficial for foreign to trade. It's unfair and hurts other countries when it's based on low wages. So no. Wage is still lower in foreign, but foreign gains. And this is, of course, a very simplistic model. In real life, why is it so good that for China, or for instance, to have traded with the rest of the world, is that they didn't only take advantage of trade to concentrate on the industry that for which they were good. So especially for industries that don't require very technical skills with highly productive workers. But then they were also able to import so much good technologies from the rest of the world. So that's why they gain a lot. So, anyway, so in real life, advantage. Also from technological transfer. All right. Yeah, so it's a bit the same idea. So, oh yeah, okay. So no, this is sorry, this is more of a an argument for this. So I thought it was from the point of view of foreign, but it's from the point of view of home. So why? So foreign competition is unfair and hurts other countries when it's based on low wages. So I think what they're saying, so this answer is, yeah, it sort of applies to the other case. So this, I think, what they mean is it's unfair for unproductive workers at home. So, may unfair for industries at home. But it's best to concentrate on our strength cheese and yeah, import from the world what we are not so good at. In real life, so reorganization of industries can be painful for older workers in declining sectors. So for instance, the garment sector. So if you have to compete against low wages in Bangladesh or Vietnam or other less advanced countries in Asia, then if you were working in this sector in Canada or the US, then it's really painful at, I don't know, 50 years old to try and find a job elsewhere. So yeah, here Ricardian model. assumes that this happens. Instantly. And costs nothing. So this is what we have to be aware of, right? So in real life, if you have to decide, oh, we're just going to ditch the wine production at home because, yeah, it's better to import it. Yes, but everybody who was working there, it's not easy to just change everything right away. But is trade the only reason why this reorganization may happen? I'm opening up for you. So is there some other reason why some industries are in decline?
No, I think that also customer demand plays a role, and also the capacities you have as a country in terms of natural resources.
So as to your second point, it would say, so what you would say is, for example, if you exploited all the natural resources you had, then your industry is in decline?
Yes.
Yeah, so you have an example in mind exactly, or?
For example, some materials you need for mobile phones or animals, if you hunted them extinct, for example, if you produce fur and you use a certain animal and there are just no animals, then your industry is affected by that.
All right. So this is, of course, we're going beyond the model, but it's just to keep our head cool and remember that life is complicated and many other things that have to be taken into account. So yeah, no, I think what I'm going to add is some comment. Yeah. So other or industry, maybe in decline. So natural resources, yes. I don't think this happens all that often, but yeah, I guess it can happen. If you really overexploit something and it's gone, then yes. So what was your first point? I didn't get the first situation.
I said that the demand can be declining in the market, that, for example, customers are just not interested in a certain product anymore, and that affects the industry.
Yeah. So this is linked to something else. So for instance, what I would imagine is the following. So if I were producing maps with papers, and now why would the demand for maps with papers decline? It's because we have better things than maps with papers, i.e. phones. So where does that, where would that fit? What would that be?
A technological advancement?
Yes.
I have actually also a question. Is in this argument also the workforce included? Because, for example, if a country is facing political turmoil or war, people migrate to a different country, right? And this is also affecting the industry in the home country. Then is this also included or not? Because in the Ricardo model, we assume that there is no migration.
Yeah, we assume there's no migration.
So here we can't use this as an argument.
No, now this is really I'm opening up to, so that's the strength and the weakness of economics. The strength of economics is when we make an argument and we're very strict about it, and we have a model that's self-consistent and works well, but it has a lot of assumptions. Now, I want to put that in perspective and say, yes, in real life, many other things can go on too. So,
okay, thank you.
Yeah, but so the real culprit here is technological change. So, so what I want to say here is, for instance, so Donald Trump was elected, and he said, "Oh, so vote for me because you are all losing your jobs and having a very hard time. That's all because of China." Well, economists said, well, let's look at it. And it's true that some people, you can attribute the fact that they lost their job in some specific sectors to competition from China. But most workers in many industries, like for instance, coal extraction or steel mills or all these things, that's not because of international competition. That's all because of technological change. It's because 50 years ago, you would use 10 workers to do something, and then it became 5 workers, and then 2 workers, and then 1 worker that does the whole thing. So, so we have to keep this in mind. It's when we say, "Oh, yeah, trade hurts you badly," it can happen sometimes, but it can be other things too. Yeah, and so the technological change is really the big one. All right. Yeah, so myth 3, trade. Yeah, this is just what we said. So for foreign gains, anyways. So the advantage of technical transfer. So yeah, gains in China and many other emerging in recent years. In last let's say 40 years. In unprecedented. Unprecedented. So this you can't. So yes, people can criticize a lot the fact that working conditions are harsh, and there's no denying that. But the overall picture is that so many of them, instead of, so yeah, the story would be migration in China in particular. Migration from low productive jobs in the countryside, in agriculture, to kind of low wage, or yeah, how would I say, to not so low wage jobs in the factories. So from our perspective, the jobs in the factories in China are very low wage. But from their perspective, the question is, do I stay in agriculture, or do I move to the city and try my luck there, even though it's going to be hard? It was hard, but the the growth of China and the growth of living standards has really been tremendous. So it's very hard to say that China has been hurt by trade, and that's quite the opposite, actually. Yeah, so this is the one aspect of it. So if you compare the wages and unit labor costs in 1975, in 2000, so you see, so the gains in South Korea, that's just tremendous. So if you take the United States as the benchmark, so you compare the productivity of a worker in these countries compared to the one in the US. So in 75, the productivity of, yeah, I don't know where these, anyway, so if you, in South Korea, $5. So a worker in the US was 20 times more productive in 1975 than a Korean worker. Then they traded a lot. And now you look at South Korea, it's not the same level as Europe or Canada or the US, but it's just, there's no way you can say it's still a poor country. So now it's 41 to 100. So almost half. So so it means that compared to the US worker, they multiplied by 8 their productivity. So that's just tremendous. That Taiwan 6 to 30, Hong Kong 12 to 28, Singapore 13 to 37. Yeah, it's sad they don't show China. I would like to see China what this is. Maybe they didn't have good data in 75. I don't know. Or maybe it looked quite a lot more like Taiwan because, it's just China, but then Taiwan industrialized quite well. So then again, if you go there, it's not as rich as the US, but the gap is much lower than it used to be. So that this is a technological transfer. Yeah. So technological. Learning by doing. Etc. So all this came thanks to trading. If there's a good case to be made that without trade, they would probably have caught up a bit to the US, but probably not as fast as they did. All right, so that's many goods. So I don't know if I want to go there because it's yeah, I can just say more or less what the idea is, but now what I want is to give you an exercise so you can just cool down and see that you can understand and do the exercise, so not be too stressed about it. So here what they say basically is, what if you have many different goods? What goods are you going to produce at home or foreign? So the thing is, it's always the same idea, is you produce the goods for which you have a comparative advantage, and you let the other country produce what goods for which you're not so good at. So what you do is, here they show, so unit labor requirements at home, 153,612 for different things. So enchiladas, that's a pretty Mexican dish. So I guess in Mexico, you have a much better ability to do them. And this foreign would be probably Mexico. So then what's the unit labor requirement? You see that for most things except enchiladas, it's home is better, but still what matters is the comparative advantage. And what you just do is you rank them according to comparative productivity. And you see that the biggest comparative productivity in home is for apples. which is 10 divided by 1, then bananas 40 divided by 5, then caviar 12 divided by 3, etc. So 10, 8, 4, 2.75. And then based on the relative size of the country, you will have a situation where, for instance, home produces apples, bananas, and caviars, and then imports dates and enchiladas, which is, it's really not productive at doing. Makes sense? And of course, it's, if foreign is bigger and home is small, then home can produce produce just apples and bananas, or just apples. So if home is big country, will more products. If home small country, it may specialize in a single instance. So if you're a very small European country, then you just say, I'm going to produce apple and import the rest. The rest is better produced elsewhere. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah, and so what matters is the relative size of the workforce in home and foreign. I'm just going to show you briefly what this does. So you can rank these. So apples, bananas, caviar, dates, enchiladas, and this RS is the relative size of the labor force. And why I don't want to spend too much on that, it's because this is, again, a completely different graph than the previous one we've seen. The previous one, there was demand and supply. Here, this is a graph purely about supply and the relative size of the labor force. So if home is very small, it would be something like here, for instance. And if home is large, it would be here, for instance. So this, and then, yeah, this is what happened. Now I don't want to dig into too much the detail of that. That's just yeah, that's technical and not super interesting in the sense that we get what's going on. Yeah, non-transport goods. So of course, a lot of goods are not transported, not transportable, so not tradable. And if you add transport costs, then you reduce the gain from trade. So at some point, you may say, if trade costs were 0, then I would gain by trading such and such. But if trade costs are $10 or $20 or $100 per ton, then at some point it just eats all my gain from it. So I'd rather not trade. So this is quite intuitive. So here they give the example of haircuts, so or auto repairs. So even if yeah, hairdressers in Mexico or China were super good and very cheap, doesn't matter. It's by the way, I lived in Sweden for a while. And at some point I needed a haircut. So I asked my roommate, so I asked her, so she was Swedish, and so, can you recommend me some place to get a good haircut? And she said, oh yeah, go there. My boyfriend goes there. It's very cheap. So I go there, and it was 50 euros. And for a guy with very short hair. So I'm like, okay, so that's the technology in Sweden. So they are very, very technological, and they pay super high wages. But the thing is, I used to live in Mexico not in Mexico the city, but in Puebla, exactly. And in Puebla, so I could go for a haircut and it would be, I think it was 5 pesos back then, which was a few cents. Yeah, so few cents in Mexico, whereas so that's what happens if you have a sector like haircuts, which cannot be traded. So tough luck, you have to pay super high wages if you're a technological country, and you can pay very, very low wages if you're not so advanced countries. Yeah, so that's the deal with transport costs. We're going to see this again later. So this is, yeah, non-traded goods. Prices are do not equalize. So expensive in rich countries. Not expensive poorer countries. So this is called the Stopper yes effect. So it's one day in your life, if you come across this phenomenon, it was described by Stopper and Samuelson. Samuelson is one of the greatest economists of the 20th century. So Stopper, I don't really know who he was. He's known for that effect. Yeah, so some empirical evidence of the Ricardian model. So this is if you look at the relative productivity of some sectors in the US and Britain, and then are these things exported or imported? So here is the ratio of US to British productivity. So higher is things that US do well, and lower is things that Britain do better. And here is the ratio of US British exports. So if you export more or less, yeah, so I guess, okay, I guess this is the I thought I understood well, but now I'm not too sure exactly about this. Anyways, it reflects US exports, but I don't remember the exact definition of this scale there. I have to look it up to make sure. But anyway, so the higher the it means the more this is something that is exported by US but imported by Britain, by the British. Okay. So as you can see, when the US is productive, then it's going to export a lot. And when the US is not productive, then it's going to import more, and Britain is going to export more. So yeah, I'd like to have some more detail about this graph too. So what are the points? What does the UK do better than the US? I don't know. All right. So what time is it now? Okay, so we still have 20 minutes. So take a piece of paper or your computer or something, and now let's see if you remember a bit things. So we're going back to what I want is to make this whole graph a bit less scary for you. All right. So let's start by asking the following. So I think I have my, okay. Okay, so now that we're dealing with wine and maple syrup. So maple syrup is something that Quebec produces a lot, and wine is something that France produces a lot. I know that many of you come from France, so it's going to be a known terrain. So assume, first of all, that Quebec does not trade, so we don't think about this. So all we have, and Quebec is home. Yeah, I could have put Canada, but anyway, so Quebec. So it always takes ALM equals 2 hours to produce 1 liter of maple syrup. And it always takes ALW equals 3 hours to produce 1 liter of wine. So what will be the relative price of maple syrup to wine? So PM divided by PW if Quebec does not trade. Take your time, try to remember the maybe I could again give you the formulas. So that's going to help you. So we had that PM divided by PW equals what? Somebody remembers? So this is something you maybe remember or maybe not. Somebody has an idea? Yeah, I realize it might not be easy for you because you don't have all the documents that I've been talking about so far. So I should have maybe shared. I don't know how best to do it. Okay. So, but the formula is PM divided by PW is equal to, so what it, go ahead.
I'm not sure.
Go ahead.
I mean, equal ALM.
Yeah.
The quantity, then is the quantity, right? No.
ALM is this, it's how much, how long do you need, or how many workers, but here, how long you need to produce 1 liter of maple syrup.
Yeah.
And is it divided by something maybe?
Yes, but that's the thing. No.
You're on the right track. It's good. So if it costs,
Wait.
if it,
No.
yeah, so if we are in Quebec, then it always costs, takes 2 hours to produce 1 liter of maple syrup and 3 hours to produce 1 liter of wine. And the more hours it takes to produce something, the more expensive it is, right? And we've seen that for firms to be willing to produce both wine and maple syrup, then the only way that this will be the case is if ALM equals to, so okay, what I'm going to do is copy the questions on the document, then it's going to be less, take less time maybe, or less space, yeah. Okay, so let me copy again what this was. So so we remember if no trade and Quebec produces positive quantity of both products, then profit must be 0 in each industry. So wage must be equal to P, so P divided by A, yeah, P, so PM divided by ALM, and it's also equal to the wage in the other sector, so that's PW divided by ALW. So we find that PM divided by PL by PW equal to ALM. So you are on the right track. ALM divided by ALW. So it's equal to 2 divided by 3. All right.
I've got a question here. If we were in the exam, would we have to write this whole thing, how we came to the formula, or would it have been all right to just write the formula we used and plug in the values?
So here's my take on it. You do what I ask you to do. So if I just ask you, please give me the number, then I don't ask you to justify, then you can just give the number. But if you think, oh yeah, how did I find this? I think it was this, and then you get the number wrong. But I sort of see you were in the right direction. If say the class average is not that high and I'm being generous, then it's easier for me to be generous in this situation.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
And plus also it's always good to remember where things come from. So, oh yeah, this is the reason. So wage is equal to the price divided by how much you need, how many workers you need. So this is benefit from worker, but this is how much, how many hours is going to take the worker to produce. So that's essentially it has to be equal to the hourly wage, for instance. All right, so that's question 1. Question 2. So this is a bit more tricky. So if the relative demand of wine in Quebec is QM divided by QW equals to 1 divided by PM over PW. And the population of Quebec is 120. How much wine will be produced? So this is a demand function, but it's a relative demand. So this is how much people are going to want to consume wine relative to maple syrup relative to wine, given the ratio of price of maple syrup divided by price of wine. All right. So this is it's really is a demand equation, but it's relative. But otherwise, it's a demand equation. It's like saying Q demanded equals to 10 minus P, for instance. But here it's Q demanded of wine divided by, or maple syrup divided by wine as a function of, here it's 1 over the price of wine divided. So it's how you have to think about it. Anyway, so I leave it there. So take a few seconds to think about it. Maybe you don't get to the end, but you can still get halfway, maybe.
I'm not sure, but maybe have an idea.
Go ahead.
So if we look at what is written, it's QM divided by QV. So it's 1 divided by 2/3. So
Yeah.
it makes 1.6.
Yeah.
And if we multiply 120 with 1.6, we obtain 200. So it could be the quantity that will be produced.
Oh, yeah. Oh, does it look like? Let me check my answers. I don't have it anymore. Okay, so I have to do it again. I hope I remember. So your first start is very good. So yeah, this is a bit smaller. Okay. So yeah, you're right. We already know what will be the relative price if Quebec doesn't trade and produces both. It has to be 2/3 because that's a reflection of the relative technology of each. So we have QM divided by QW equals that small 1/2/3. So it's equals to, yeah, I'm just going to leave it as fraction 3/2. And now the question is, yeah, so that's that's something I think some of you probably got. And now the question is, how do you use this? So I know that labor constraint so the labor used in maple syrup plus the labor used in wine has to be equal to 120 in total. And do I know what the labor used in maple syrup is? So I have that the quantity produced in maple syrup will be equal to, or rather, yeah, no, the labor used in maple syrup will be equal to the quantity used in maple syrup, the quantity produced multiplied by ALM, and the labor used in wine production will be equal to QW times ALW. Does that make sense? So here I'm going to use this, this thing, and this thing to find out what LW and LM and QW and QM are. Yeah, so what can I do? So yeah, I can just substitute this here. So QM times this is QW times. And this is, so I'm going to use this and so let's just multiply by QW on each side. So QM equals QW times 3/3. So yeah, I can substitute this. Here, this is what I get. So let's substitute ALM and ALW. So I get ALM is 2, ALW is 3. And then I'm going to just put this there. Equals 120. So QW, this is 3/3 times 2, so that's 3. 3 plus 3, that's 6. So 120 divided by 6. So I get 20. So what was the question again? How much wine? Yeah. So QW is 20. Do you see how I did that? so it's not super easy, right? So here what you need is you need to remember that you have this constraint at the country level. LM plus LW equals 120, and then this is labor used to produce maple syrup. This is the labor used to produce wine. So substituting both. And then using information from the manipulation. So, and then that's quite easy to find. So I'm going to produce 120, and I could do the reverse to find the other. Okay, so what I'm going to do is post the other questions on the website, and you get 1 week to think about them. And this, it doesn't count for anything, it's just to practice. But then I'm going to give you an exercise in which you have to answer them. And so next time so there are no TA sessions for this class. But yeah, next time I'm going to start by just going over the answers. But so I tell you, try to do them this week. Otherwise, it's not worth it at all. You have to spend some mental energy trying to do them, right? And but so you see how this works. The two next questions are easy, but then the last one is the more difficult one. So you have to think more about it. Okay, so let's last question before we leave. No, all right. So sorry for making you spend much mental energy on this this class. Ricardian model looks simple, but when you dig deeper, it can become a bit messy. All right, so thanks a lot, and have a great week.
Thank you, Professor. Have a nice day.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.